Hello to our listeners, and thanks for joining us with this episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. I'm your host, Marcus, and today we're talking about marketing, which is, of course, a very relevant topic for any startup, but there are lots of factors and things to consider when doing marketing for your early phase companies. So today I'm joined by Marc Duke, who has a vast experience from working with marketing in different environments. So first of all, thank you, Marc, for joining us for this episode.
My pleasure.
All right, would you give a little bit of a background and a short introduction to yourself?
Sure. I've worked in the business-to-business technology marketing space for probably about 15 years. Out of college, I started off in a small tech PR agency, moved to a much larger agency, then went in-house working in the vendor community. And then for the last 10 years or so have worked as a consultant, at the same time becoming a chartered marketer with the Chartered Institute of Marketing. And the last couple of years, I've really focused on the area of supporting startups with their marketing requirements. And that's what drives me and what I enjoy doing most.
All right, and startups are very distinct types of companies in a way. They're a different type of animal. So how do you think marketing differs in that context rather than, for example, something else? What is the typical characteristics of marketing with those types of companies?
The key differences are probably the fact that marketing is absolutely essential to the business, much more so than established companies. That's firstly. Secondly, the pressure to deliver is incredibly great, and the speed at which things need to move is a lot faster than with an established company. And the other thing is that it's much more tricky because you tend to have a lot less people, and also budgets are absolutely crucial. Not that they wouldn't be in a larger organization, but in a startup, it's just so important. Therefore, that really puts a very big focus on the results that you wind up delivering.
And what kind of companies do you typically work for in terms of startups?
Tends to be slightly later stage than just the initial idea. So if you're looking about in terms of funding, it would tend to be companies that have probably already got seed funding and maybe possibly round A or even round B. I guess more recently, I've done some work with companies that have actually even been further down the line than that, like either round C or round D, and even looking for some form of a traditional exit from their current status. But there tends to be quite a lot that unifies them all, and that is namely a very, very strong focus on delivering results very quickly.
Let's touch on actual marketing for startup companies. So what do you think are the most important areas to keep a focus on in terms of doing marketing activities for early stage or relatively early stage companies?
I think there are two really key things. Well, I guess three maybe. So I apologize for that. So in terms of the first one is identifying very clearly who are the stakeholders. There's really a split between, if you're in a fundraising scenario, that in itself is actually a marketing project, first up. And then aside from that, almost running in parallel, is really getting an absolute laser focus on who your customer is and also who your competition is. The number of times I meet with companies that say, well, our product's unique, our solution is unique, there's no one else in the marketplace that is doing it. That might well be the case, but the broader marketplace as a whole has to deal with context. So therefore, you have to put yourself in a position where you can compare yourself to others, even if you'd rather that you didn't. And that's the second point. And I think that the last one, which is really, really important, is who is the customer? Really a laser focus. Who is going to use the product or the service, and who is going to endorse potential purchase as well? Those are really, really important things. And I guess all those three things, I mean, it sounds relatively straightforward, but it isn't. And the other issue on top of that is that invariably with a startup company, you've got one, maybe two people, if you're lucky, three, that have to do all of those in one go. as well as all of the other things as well, which is incredibly, incredibly demanding and difficult.
All right. What do you think are some key challenges that you've seen when working with startup companies? What are the kind of fault lines that they go through when setting up their marketing practices?
I think one of the issues is to become a little bit too product focused or too technology focused, rather than actually step back and think, okay, so what's the real value and the real benefit? That's the first really big issue. The other issue is just one of clarity of execution. Because things move so quickly and there are so many different pressures, it's very, very difficult for companies to actually sort of say, right, well, you know what, we're going to try this particular thing for a given time frame. Now, I don't mean in the sort of traditional, well, we'll do a quarter by quarter marketing plan or year by year, because those time frames are just totally irrelevant in the startup scenario. But actually sort of take a much broader picture and say, okay, broadly speaking, this is where I want the company to be 6 weeks, 3 months from now, and then sit down and think, okay, well, how am I going to do this? And the other thing, to actually work out what bits as a startup that you can do and other bits that it's much more cost effective, both in terms of time and in terms of money, to get somebody else to do it. Those are kind of big challenges.
Do you think that there are any ways that you can actually avoid those in the startup context? Because obviously with the environment, there are kind of inherent challenges that go with that. So to what degree can you actually escape from these different challenges and a plan for them?
It's a difficult one, really, because I think a lot of the time there are individuals that almost inherently lend themselves towards being entrepreneurs. So therefore, some people would say there's a lot of trial by error and you learn by experience. The only thing I would say is that at the initial phase of the company is to try and bring people into the company, be it non-exec or even very, very part-time, that have very sound marketing experience and have proven track records of being able to do things in the right context. And if you're able to do that before you start, then that really helps. I think a lot of the time people come up with the idea and the enthusiasm and they just run off with it straight away, rather than actually saying, right, I've got a great idea here. Right, let me think and plan. Not to the point where you basically get totally bound up in planning, which I have seen with a lot of companies that get so fixated by planning they don't actually execute. But if you're able to plan before you start, and rather than just in a business plan, just put, well, we'll put X budget for marketing, but be a little bit more precise about it, or surround yourself with advisors, be it non-exec directs or people that are involved even from say an incubator or other entity which is providing support, which have got really good experience in that space, or even for that matter, potentially a mentor. That will probably go a long way to cutting out the problems I've outlined.
I was just thinking that since you have worked with many startup companies, do you have any good examples of how they've utilized marketing to make some small wins or make progress on their beginnings of their journeys?
Okay, I'll give you a very good example of a company that I've been doing some work with. The company's called Palm Tree Technology. They have a very interesting SaaS-based multi-factor authentication solution. If you're not particularly techie, it's basically a way of ensuring that when you're doing any form of transaction online, it's as secure as it possibly could be, and it's linked to who you are and the device that you're using when you're making that transaction. And normally these solutions are very costly and very un-user friendly. They've effectively developed what they term as the Google Maps of authentication. They realized very quickly that they were targeting a particular type of user. In this case, it was actually the developer type of person that was developing applications. And they harnessed the power of Web 2.0 or social media in a massive, massive way as a huge source of leads, which if you compare that to using traditional methods, much, 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 much more cost effective. And the ability for them they really made